one of the reasons that we were so enthusiastic about this session is that we think of customer service, especially for generative AI, as similar to books were for e-commerce. In other words, this feels like it's the application that is first having significant real-world deployment at scale. Books were the kind of entry point, and then expanded to all these things. And customer service may end up being the same way, that it was the way into the organization, and then it grows from there.
Welcome to the Darby Mills series, Intrepid Pioneers of the Next Economy, featuring discussions with entrepreneurs at the forefront of deploying machine intelligence and brainstorming sessions about where the technology may go at the limit.
Welcome, everybody, to the Darby Mills series, Intrepid Pioneers of the Next Economy. In this show, we meet with entrepreneurs who are at the frontier of their industries in terms of deploying machine intelligence. We springboard from their current use of AI to brainstorm on where this will go at the limit and how we might get there. I'm Ajay Agrawal, co-founder of Intrepid Growth Partners, and my three collaborators are Rich Sutton of the University of Alberta, who pioneered reinforcement learning, Sendhil Mullainathan of MIT, who uses machine learning to better understand human decision-making, and Niamh Gavin, an applied AI scientist working on optimizing open and closed foundation models, PAN modalities for novel semiconductors. Rich, Sendhil, and Niamh are all senior advisors at Intrepid Growth Partners. The domain we're exploring in this episode is automating customer service. We're here with the leadership team of the leading AI platform for enterprise customer service teams, Ada. Ada is an AI agent platform that attempts to automatically resolve customer service interactions. They are based in Toronto. They have approximately 400 employees, and in their last financing were valued over $1 billion. With us today are Mike Murchison, CEO and co-founder, along with Mike Gozzo, Chief Product and Technology Officer. And with that, let's start the show. Mike Murchison, maybe you could kick us off by just sharing with everybody the state of the union at Ada, like just in sense of the size of the organization and the amount of interactions that you have with customers on your platform, so that our listeners and our group here, everyone gets a sense of the scale of the operation at present.
Happy to. Great to be here, everybody, and excited for today's discussion. So our mission at Ada is to make customer service extraordinary for everyone. We are building AI agents that are specialized in customer service, and our objective is to create AI agents that are as capable as human customer service agents. And our belief is that if we can create AI agents that are as capable as human agents, we will enable businesses to essentially no longer have to choose between scaling their customer service and offering quality customer service as they grow. And to date, we started the company about 8 years ago. We have powered more than 4 billion customer service interactions for hundreds of different enterprise brands around the world. We have achieved a automated resolution rate, which we can share more about what that metric means, but an automated resolution rate north of 80% for some of our enterprise clients. I'd say our average resolution rate continues to climb steadily. We are getting closer to our objective of automatically resolving 100% of all interactions, but we're not there yet. And we're making investments across the board to get there as quickly as possible. Some things to understand about our technology, which Goz, who runs our product and technology organizations, can illuminate further, are that we are focused on automatically resolving the greatest number of customer service interactions with the least amount of effort. So as an application company, we focus very firmly on making AI easy to use for customer service teams and enabling them to deploy AI customer service agents across all channels of communication. We started in simply messaging channels, but we've recently extended our offering to power conversations in email, SMS, social channels, and now voice as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And so 2 comments here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Niamh for any questions or comments you'd like to start with. one of the reasons that we were so enthusiastic about this session is that we think of customer service, especially for generative AI, as similar to books were for e-commerce. In other words, this feels like it's the application that is first having significant real-world deployment at scale. In other words, I think there's a lot for everyone from every industry to learn from what's happening in this sector. And maybe partly it has nothing to do with technology. It may be partly to do with humans and change management, because a lot of companies had already outsourced their customer service, and they were doing it in India or Philippines or somewhere. And so it was more natural. They had less internal resistance to bringing in this type of automation. And of course, once you have machine intelligence interacting with customers, it's no longer the cost that it used to be. And so now that, I think when people are listening to this, in your mind, the context that you're taking this thing that used to be a significant cost, and by bringing down the cost, it enables companies to do much more interaction. In other words, rather than being sort of feeling every time a customer calls, it's costing the company money, that it's a way to engage their customers and potentially do much more than just, customer service may be like books. Books were the kind of entry point and then expanded to all these things. And customer service may end up being the same way, that it was the way into the organization, and then it grows from there. So that's point one. The second thing I wanted to highlight here is this. Mike made very quick reference to automated resolution. And I think that's going to be very important in this conversation, because it is, from my understanding, the central performance metric. And so, Mike, if you could just elaborate on what is on an automated resolution. So you mentioned 80% as a high watermark at the moment, that some of the customers have achieved 80%. What does that mean, and how do you measure percent automated resolution?
Sure. So an automated resolution refers to a conversation between a customer, a human customer, and the business that is relevant, it's accurate, and it's safe, and it does not involve a human agent. And the reason that this is a significant measure of success in the AI customer service world is that up until very recently, the primary way a business was measuring AI's impact on its brand was simply via a measure of either deflection or containment. In other words, they were only measuring whether or not a human was involved on their end or not. There was no measure of the quality of the experience. We are annotating every conversation that Ada powers for those three additional measures, which go beyond just whether or not a human was involved to also measure the quality of the interaction. And we do that across modalities, as Gozzo, I'm sure you can speak more to in a minute.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Niamh and just remind our listeners that the purpose of this conversation is to use what you're hearing here as a springboard. And then we are going to think about what does this start to look like as we approach the limit. So as we take what the companies like this one are doing today, and then imagine as the machine intelligence develops, where does this land ultimately? And then we think through what's the pathway to get from where we are today to that future. So Niamh, nice to see you, and over to you.
Likewise, and I think you both teed it up perfectly in terms of it being a mature use case. There's a strong platform from which to kind of leverage AI. And then likewise, Mike, I love kind of the quality. So moving from the scripts and workflows to that contextual reasoning in that more conversational flow through your reasoning engine. So instead of the past where you had like, if this, then that, now you can feed in all the policies, the analytics, steer by coaching and that human in the loop tagging through that continuous improvement. And then thereafter, plug it into the existing workflow. So you have the agentic orchestration on the back end. And now you're starting to get that full journey, which is a contextual loop you actually need for quality impact, pre, post-sale support. And then you can start even moving into the up and cross sales and only escalate to the human for the value add stuff that they actually want to do. So you don't have turkeys voting for Christmas, but actually, great, you've removed all the tedious repetitive work, and now I just jump in when it matters. So I'm sold in the vision. I think to kind of double click on where Ajay was going is for this kind of podcast on the AI and the Gen AI side, the workflow part is still brittle. You're customer facing, so there is reputational risk, even if you sandbox it prior. There's always novel use cases. So just take us through that AI integration kind of workflow of each customer not only has their specific policies and guidance, but they also want you to capture the tone of the company. So how do you do that? Is it fine-tuning DPO, RAGs, pair floras, etc.? Then you have the scoring of the effectiveness of the reasoning engine, and that kind of differs per model. And then we have the fact that people want the end-to-end, but we still got, as I say, that tool use function calling is brittle, but the native integration is better. And so do the model makers with, Claude, computer artifacts and workspace start to eat your lunch. So there's some themes I'd kind of love to cover. And as apologies for the monologue, but I hope the context helps.
No, that's very helpful. Gozzo, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I can start off by talking about how we've put together the various components of the system to start to deliver on our promise. So the first thing is that we're trying as much as possible from like a strategic perspective to use foundation models that are relatively untouched wherever we possibly can. And the main reason for this is that as an application layer company, our customers are often trusting us to ensure that we grow that automated resolution metric, our North Star, as quickly as possible while there's underlying model changes. We believe that the companies that are operating at the foundation model layer are going to innovate dramatically quickly, and the sheer intelligence that they're able to provide because of the amount of compute that they can throw at problems. As a result, we've designed the system to be tuned primarily at, call it, the prompt and example layer. So we'll leverage a combination of both in-context learning within our own prompts, but also we've designed the management experience to capture the human preference, and then we reinforce it through the use of our automated metrics. So what do I mean there? Upon first setup of an AI agent, there's really two main tasks that need to happen. The first is we connect to some kind of repository or knowledge source for doing RAG, because this is, table stakes. Everybody wants to answer questions specific to their business. The next thing that we'll do is we'll walk the customer through an initial setup of their AI agent's personality. This is defining like jargon that really makes sense. It might find all over your documents, but you need to provide some hints at the, bringing in some elements of brand tone and so on and so forth. Again, very, very high level and in generalist terms. Now, once this is defined, the system can perform, and it's going to resolve at a certain percentage of those inquiries coming in. And even if it might provide relevant, safe, and accurate responses, there might not yet be enough context in the system for it to really be aligned to business guidelines and business goals and preferences. This is where we bring in a mechanism that we call coaching. And this is where the human comes in to really close the feedback loop. And it's something that we believe we're going to be able to automate in fairly short order. But essentially, humans can review every interaction that happens on the system. And when they review the interaction, they don't only get to review, question and ultimate answer. They also get access to the complete reasoning trace that's in the system. From the moment the question is asked to as the different modules, or essentially the different LLMs that we're using, as we break apart the problem and iteratively reflect on it, each one of those decision points can be influenced by the human. And once they provide their preference, so it could be phrase future inquiries of this with a more sensitive tone, or rank these search retrieval results in a different order next time you execute a similar query. As these kind of forms of preference are expressed, that's where we commit them to memory and are going to retrieve these preferences back on every single answer to the question. And it's through that mechanism that we're primarily aligning the system today. That said, we think from a latency and cost perspective, there's some real performance advantages to fine-tuning. We're using it in certain elements of our system, specifically when it comes down to measurement and analytics. So our pipeline that is assessing whether or not conversations are resolved, that's making use of preference data that's being collected both by human audits of past resolution scores and also inputs into our dashboard. And we've been able to fine-tune our model that is assessing resolution on these signals. There's LLM as a judge, but a fine-tuned LLM, to a point where we can get anywhere between 82 and 90% agreement with human auditors that are consuming the same conversations. So that's a place where, just that automated feedback loop already has shown a lot of benefit. And you can imagine that, through some of this information, but as well, some of the initial preference data that we're collecting through the coaching process, we think we can drive automated improvements throughout the rest of the system as well.
I think it's something which is striking that balance between, I suppose, a question back to you as to, as you say, the only kind of constant is change. None of the model makers are standing still. And as they get feedback from their end users too, they're integrating a lot of this into their models natively, which always kind of performs better than add-ons. So how do you, as a tech person with a specific application, strike that balance between how much should we wait and see what they develop and leverage that versus actually maybe we should own this part, go deeper or get ahead?
And that's a really good point. I think there's two answers from a product management side that help us make that decision, because fundamentally that decision is a product strategy perspective.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we think about is really impact in terms of our core mission. So how quickly can we drive up automated resolutions with the greatest ease for our customers? So what technology, what parts of the system are critical for us to do this rapidly so we can display real results? That's going to have us, make a decision of how much of the stack at any one time that we want to own. And I think additionally, a lot of it really comes down to the fact that we're seeking to make the system as simple as possible for us to maintain and operate, right? There's a real premium for us to be able to drive that simplicity, because at the application layer, we'll talk about enterprises that are just getting started and dabbling in generative AI. Some of them have chief AI officers, have built out entire teams to do self-builds. But in many cases, those teams are actually best suited not by working in a domain like customer service, but by applying that talent into business problems that are touching their core line of business and aren't just an operational concern. So what we aim to do is make sure that we can be the most trusted from an alignment perspective. And I think in many cases, the businesses that are selecting the tools today are doing it less so through the comparison against performance benchmarks, and are doing it much more so based on what level of alignment and trust can they place in the entire system from an end-to-end perspective. And it's just the reality of how these tools are being adopted today.
And just on that one kind of last question before I open it up is, given that you're reliant on the foundation models and you have that choice between open and closed, and often broad sweeping statement, the open is more components for you to stitch together, where the closed tend to be these integrated solutions. If you want that kind of tracing ability to kind of look back and observe and do the scoring, and in addition, your reputation and your customer's reputation depends on that alignment and trust. How would you achieve both those things in closed models where you don't necessarily get to see the underlying policy, the guardrails? How do you do the evals and get that full black box tracing that you require?
Yeah, there's a great question. You would think that it would lend us to having a preference to open, but in the architecture that we've devised, it actually doesn't matter so much right now. And here's why. The main reason is that we're using a multitude of LLMs, each tasked with a different subtask in order to resolve a customer service inquiry. So rather than just having a monoprompt that is looking to resolve the entirety of the conversation, we actually have this architecture where the first layer, when an utterance comes from the customer, that layer is only responsible for outputting a single integer, which is essentially a delegation to a sublayer. And each element in the second layer is going to have a particular skill. One is really, tasked towards knowledge retrieval and re-ranking and query rewriting and all of that RAG pipeline. We have another, which is just really made to do chit chat and contextual replies. Another, which is focused on tool use. And every time this planner model delegates the conversation, it takes all of the context it has, including the previous decisions that it's made, brings it over to the model that's delegated to it, and then that is responsible for navigating the intricacies of that step. And when that step is completed, it iterates back on itself until there's enough context in the context window to be able to output a reply to the customer, at which case we check it against semantic grounding if it's a relevant type of question that we should associate for that, and then we output it to the customer. This adds latency to the system for sure. Like definitely,
Right,
if we're, when we're thinking about it from a, a voice perspective, it's been quite challenging to get to work on that modality. It's been extremely effective on messaging and on email, as you can imagine, because your time constraint isn't as tight and you can do this. But then the nice benefit here is that you've effectively like decomposed the reasoning process, so you can build an interface for control and alignment and really injecting things in there. Going forward, like, what do we think about open source versus closed source models? If I have to look at all of the IP we've built, the part that I'm most proud of and I think is most enabling to Ada has been the amount of work that we've spent on our testing harness. Right. Because we know that we want to be as rapid as possible as bringing the latest innovations to market. So we built out an automated test suite effectively that looks at our system using whatever model or whatever configuration or set of models that we want to use at any given time. And we take, for any particular customer, we can look at their conversation volume and we can spin up agents that work as customers so that each have a different goal. Try and get a refund, try and look up where your product is, try and reset your password. And we will task those agents to speak to our service agent with that goal. And we'll run 1,000, 2,000 conversations like this to the system. And we can very quickly see on not only our automated resolution metric, but on other metrics that we look at, we can evaluate what is the impact of swapping, GPT 3.5 Turbo for GPT 4.0. We can look at the successive releases of named model versions. We can test the open source stuff this way. And obviously there's some, variances in performance that come down to prompt engineering in some of these models that we have to account for. But largely we're able to get a pretty high degree of confidence that when we are going to change whatever model or whatever model version we use in production, that we're only going to have an improvement in the system and not a regression. And the only way that would have been possible is it's like stochastic testing approach we've taken. Just wouldn't work with, traditional like shot in the dark approaches.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect system architecture in terms of it's modular. You can then do best of breed. You can try different things as they come in and out. It's almost like a MOE or MOA type of architecture, but from an orchestration point of view. And then you almost use the chain of thought or the reflection approach to iterate until it's done. No, that's
Correct.
Terrific. Thank you.
That's right. I would also just to build on that, like, we want the foundation models to become more performant. We want them to become more intelligent. That's very much aligned with our mission. And part of our service to our customers is that we're always tapping into the best intelligence available. One of the theses that sort of underpins Ada that Gozzo is alluding to is that we believe that the instruction set that is required to align your AI agent to your business's goals is what ultimately becomes incredibly valuable about our application. We are making it incredibly easy for businesses to input that instruction set, to measure its performance, and to ultimately connect that to improvements over time.
Let me turn over to Rich. Now, Rich, any comments or questions or however you'd like to take this?
Yes, this is really excited about this application. It's broadly applicable. And I think its time is come. We know how to do certain things. We know how to be fluent in language now, and we know how to. It's a reasonably limited domain, the customer service domain, and you can sort of consider a lot of the cases and structure your system so that it gives good answers. It seems like it's feasible and possible, and I'm impressed by the results you've told me about. One question is, the language models are all designed to emit language, and you want to do customer service, so you actually have to do some actions. And so I'm wondering how you handle this basic issue of how you move from language into actual choices and commitments and decisions.
Well, it's absolutely true that actions are core to mirroring and eventually exceeding human capability. And Gozzo, I think you should share more about how we approach processes and how actions are configured and executed in Ada. I also think it's important to recognize that you can provide a lot of value in customer service without taking any action too. And there are various almost like there's like a depth through which we can consider the quality of a conversation. I'll give you an example. If you ask a business, how do I reset my password? It is possible to resolve that conversation simply by giving you a set of step-by-step instructions, no actions at all, that'll enable you to follow the steps to reset your password. But a much better experience would be that your password is automatically reset for you and you don't have to do anything at all. We are focused on resolving the most with the least amount of effort. So while many of our customers start by simply driving resolutions without any actions, over time, they end up increasing the depth of their resolution by also taking actions. I think that there's a nuance there that I think is important in the context of customer service.
Gauze, before you jump in, just Rich, is that heading in the direction that you were intended?
Yeah, I think that was a very important point, that sometimes you can just provide information and that could be the action, that could be the resolution. But yeah, I am curious because sometimes you have to authorize a return of something, or a refund or something, and these are key decisions. And I'm just wondering strategically Rich, how you make them.
Before Gauze gets into describing how they do it, just for our listeners, can you describe, because this is a deeper point than some people may appreciate that you're driving at, is what's the difference between language and action? Why are you making that distinction?
Well, the language models are good at chatting and talking and saying things, and those are all kind of costless. We can't get from the language models a decision to do something other than emit a word, right? And we need, at least in some aspects of customer service, to do things. It seems outside the scope of language models to give us a strategy for making those decisions.
So I can share how we've thought about it so far, and this may end up being wildly wrong, but so far it seems to be working. So we're going to keep working with it. We actually think about the problem of running an action very similarly to the problem of generating language. And the fact that essentially what we're asking the system to do is, based on these grounding facts of the tools available to you and the problem set that has been described to you, essentially generate a plan for solving that task. And then what we'll do is we'll execute that plan one step at a time and reflect on where we're at, whether or not we should still continue down this path or shift from then on. But the execution of the action, the retrieval of that information, becomes completely deterministic. What changes and kind of what's up to the language model is based on how its context is changing as successive steps of execution are occurring. Whether or not the plan it writes on the next run through that loop is the same as the plan it originally started with, well, that can change, right? Now, if we have like some very basic guardrails in the system that limit, how many cycles the system can do as it's executing a plan. But essentially, that's what it's doing. It is generating plan in natural language that we are then interpreting and running deterministically in order to solve the problem.
So you're saying the language model says to do these three things. In other words, it emits a sequence, it emits words that say do three things expressed in words. Like, let's say the first one is maybe authorizing a refund. Let's say the customer asks for a refund, and they say, well, okay, it emits a plan, a decision, it emits some words that say, we will offer you a refund or something. But then you've got to actually do the refund. You've got to enter into this customer system to do it. And that's a step.
Correct. And that step is, to us, completely deterministic and is, a regular API call or block of code that is going to execute to perform that step. And then we'll take the result of that operation, we'll provide it to the model, and then we'll ask it to reflect, is the plan you were on, that execution plan, still valid, or would you change something at this point? Right. And that the important thing is that continuous reflection as it's going through this process of resolution, determining whether or not it should continue on the vein that it's going, or actually use that information to find resolution in some other way. So we're always tasking the system with, you need to provide a relevant, safe, and accurate answer to this question, given only the information available to you and using only the tools that we've put in your toolbox. So if we haven't told the system that it's able to authorize a refund, it won't authorize that refund.
I'll be a little bit crude. It sounds like you look for a magic word. With the language model emits a certain word like authorize a refund, and then somehow some other part of the system recognizes that magic word is being generated by the text, and that triggers the decision.
I mean, essentially, we have it generating machine-readable JSON in the middle. We're not generating like a natural language sentence, right? But it's still predicting language tokens in that way.
The function calling tool agent mechanism, yeah.
Correct.
It runs the code. It has to decide to run the code that it generates. And so, as you say, it reflects on it and decides, do I really want to do this? But then at some point, it has to decide to actually do it.
Correct.
Okay, so if it gets confident enough, then it will run the code.
There's an interesting discussion to be had about how deterministic ADA's actions actually are. And what we've learned is that there are some use cases where they need to be 100% consistent, fully deterministic. You mentioned a refund example, Rich. That's a good one, where that could be an example for a customer segment. You always want to issue the refund the same way. There are other examples, however, where too much determinism actually erodes the quality of the customer experience. And enabling our reasoning engine to actually be creative in its tool selection is what unlocks a more delightful user experience. And so, part of our application's goal is to give fine-tuned control over which use cases you have essentially prescriptive authorship over and which ones you're affording more creative freedom to.
Okay, very good. I don't want to take all the time, but I want to get in a second big area of question, which is about how you arrange for the system to make good decisions, which you do. You're not changing the language model. You're doing prompt engineering. And I understand you have a whole set of models that you use for different goals and different ways that the conversation has been channeled to. That makes good sense. And so for all of these, what makes them good? What makes the choices and the words and the actions evaluated as good? Well, one thing you said is that you look at what's happened, and you have auditors or people that go in and look at, 80% of the cases seem like they were done well, or whatever it is. So you have people do them, and then you run many things, and you have people look at the results, and you judge. So I think you can do a great, maybe you can do the whole thing with human evaluators to judge the performance of the system. And then maybe you can do different things that can be automated changes. Okay. Yeah. So where are you guys on that dimension?
I can walk through that. That's actually where we started. And our whole, redesign of Ada to have LLMs at the core and be agentic was in establishing the quality of the system and the performance of the system. So we started off with an internal effort to annotate conversations. So we went out there, everybody in my team read a whole bunch of conversations, and we assessed them against a definition of an automated resolution. And this was, years ago now, but we came at a number which was 29% plus minus 6% based on our sample size. So that was our performance of the system on a previous workflow-based version of our software. We then said, this is great. We finally have like a metric that we seem to have some perspective on performance. How are we now going to take this and apply it across every conversation that's happening on Ada automatically without having to spend the fortune in annotators that are reading and disagreeing and trying to interpret the results? So the first thing we built was this pipeline where we were using an LLM as a judge. We essentially encoded the definition and how to establish and do an audit of a conversation into a prompt. And we applied this in batch mode across all of the conversations that were happening across Ada, and getting a bunch of different output data points from this. One, was it automatically resolved? Yes or no? If not, why not? If yes, why? And we built this in a machine readable way that we could then go and do further analysis on. This became the foundation for a couple of things. One, we use it for a product feature that allows our customers to get very in-depth reporting very quickly. So as soon as a conversation ends, they can go back, look at it, and see what the LLM as a judge has provided. They can also override this, and they can say, no, actually, this wasn't resolved because of whatever reason. We encode this, we'll use it in subsequent fine-tunes of a model. We actually got so confident in this approach because of the agreement rates we saw with the automated system of measurement and the humans that were auditing that automation, that we started to bill for it. And we have customers that are paying us entirely on the basis of this automated LLM-based evaluation of performance. And in many of those contracts, what we've worked in as a clause to get customers comfortable with it is a human audit process where we'll take the same set of conversations, we'll allow their team to look at that set, and we'll establish a baseline for what is the delta between them. That's why we know we have high agreement rates, because it's not only with our internal auditors. That system that we've built also agrees quite well with our customers that are looking to drive down the cost of the bill and always pushing us on our performance. So we're by no means done. We want to keep on refining the quality of this automated reporting, but it's actually been the key thing, because we use it in product for reporting, we use it for billing, and we also use it for all of our test beds to understand regressions in our own performance. We look at this on an automated basis to make our decisions.
So that's great. That's about evaluating the system, not changing the system.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a step where you have to create the system and the system's behavior. Roughly speaking, how is that done? Is that automated or is that done by people?
Yeah. So when our team makes any changes to Ada, they're able to essentially run a command within their development environment that will stage their changes and test it automatically against simulated customers that are asking questions of the system. And we observe on the performance of this automated resolution metric, we observe deltas in the system. So have we changed in any way? We also measure some other associated metrics at the same time, but that's all part of our development pipeline that our own team can have access to. Then within the product, when a customer makes a change on something, say they add in a new alignment instruction and they say, whenever a customer asks a question, you should end it with a relevant follow-up question to keep the conversation going. It could be an example of something that they would tell the system. We're able to have them replay the conversation that prompted them to make that change and then observe whether or not the change had the intended effect. So again, that's a very micro level, but they can look on a unit basis and see how is the system behaving in response to my instruction. And I think gradually we're going to expand this to give our customers the same ability to get more confidence on the changes they're making by running this across more permutations of the input and to understand how the output is changing.
And so Sendhil has a chance to weigh in. And then after Sendhil's comments, we're just going to do Neve, Rich, and Sendhil, a final kind of round robin of just your thoughts and where you imagine this in terms of the next important things or most fruitful things that you might try if you were thinking about how to move this towards its ultimate state. But Sendhil, first, any comments, questions from you?
Yeah, I had two questions, Mike and Mike. I love it. You guys got the two mics. I don't know why I only now noticed that. So I have two questions. One is very high level. One is fairly in the weeds. Which you guys want me to start with? It's dealer's choice.
Start high level.
High level, great. I guess one very zoomed back question I would ask is that if you play it all with any of these LLMs, or if anyone, whatever, reads about them, they have a host of sort of amazing things, but they also have a host of sort of unreliability under the hood that's very easy to kick up. And you could say unreliability is examples of like hallucinations, but even examples of like very low compliance or very weird compliance, or can go off the rails if conversations get long, just an endless amount of things. Now you guys are deploying something in a real environment, and so you've clearly found solutions to those type of unreliability. I would just love to hear a description of what do you think at a high level is giving you the sort of protective gear against that, if that makes sense. In some sense, that's essential to your business. It would just be nice. I just want to give you a chance to say, look, this is the thing that we've created. I know you told me the testing, et cetera, but as I think Rich was alluding, testing is just uncover these problems. I think you definitely have stuff you've done in the way you've baked the thing to prevent this stuff from happening. And so I would just love to give you a chance to talk about what you've done to inoculate.
Thanks, Sendhil. So what we're most excited about, and this sort of, again, underpins one of the core theses behind Ada, is that we've really created an AI management application. And we use the word AI management application quite deliberately because we really think of this as like a next generation HR suite. In the same way that human intelligence was managed through a software layer that ensured that this collection of human capital was aligned and all rowing in the same direction against a goal or many business goals, we are doing the same thing for non-human intelligence. And so part of what we've created is the ability for a business to input this set of, we call it alignment data, but it's really just, manager to employee delegation, track its performance over time, much like humans do already, and ensure that the system or the employee is improving over time. And it turns out that if you do that really effectively, you solve many of the challenges that folks are experiencing in their own day-to-day use of language models. And you do that in the customer service world, where the quality of customer service on average is abysmal. The average American will wait 43 days of their life on hold right now. That's how bad the state of customer service is. If you
On
do
the
that
plus
in
side, the
this
music
world,
is very good, Mike. So
yeah, that's right. Then I think you end up with with a solution that I think really elevates the quality of experience overall. So that's kind of the highest level,
super
Sendhil, I think,
helpful.
of what
Can I just put a little bit of words in your
yeah.
mouth and see if
Yeah.
you attest too loudly? I love the frame. I could have almost said part of what you've done by doing that is to put a supervised learning layer on top of it. And just the repetition of all of this is ensuring that we're getting the benefits of supervised learning. In a very nutshell, I know I've butchered years of
No,
hard
I
work, but is
think
that a
that's a, I think
bad way
that
to?
I think that's a good framing. I would say that there's the level of supervision that we're providing is becoming more and more abstract over time.
Great.
And
Great.
so that's
Great.
translating in just greater and greater human leverage.
And then my very in the weeds question, I think this goes all the way back to what Neve was asking, but it seems to me also kind of fundamental to your business model, which is I would have imagined a world where I could have said, well, we're getting tons of data, language data, out on exactly the domain we care about. The large language models that sit at the bottom of our stack are quite expensive from an inference point of view. They're quite slow from an inference point of view. You don't need a foundation model for what you do because very few of your customer service things are going to involve reciting digits of pi or talking about Macbeth or knowing when the 100-Year War was. Like, I assume most customer service doesn't involve any of that. And so I could have imagined a world where you're using your data to effectively distill down to a very small foundation model that works for your purpose. And it would be quite unique in class and would give you're almost setting yourself up for a distillation step. And that would have, I thought, give you, is that?
Absolutely. And the way that you think about, I mentioned that we have this decomposition of the problem, or the solution rather, into multiple different modules,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What we're generating there that is extremely interesting is this step-based reasoning data for every customer service inquiry that comes in. It's so much more valuable than the actual chat transcript or call transcript, because the AI agent is effectively showing its work, right, and all things it's considering along the way. So this is an area that we're thinking about a lot, and we're thinking about it particularly on our voice modality as where it hits us the most frequently, because we just don't have the same latency flexibility that we have on voice as we have on other channels. So this is an area where we're actively working with distillation and fine-tuning to be able to use much smaller, quicker models and approach similar performance on the reasoning step. We've had some really good results there so far. Still, I think the models that we've been successful with don't hit our latency threshold yet. But I think this is the path where we're going to get, I think, ultimately orders of magnitude decreases in latency and in essentially cost of goods sold for the business.
But can I even push you a little bit? I understand
Sure.
why you're doing it in the multimodal bit, but I think going back to, I was going to say Mike's, but whatever. Going back to Murchison's point, I think if we think of this as supervised learning, I could have imagined a world where you're actually making the supervised learning steps much faster. If even for your base model that you use to make the call, if that foundation model is a distilled, more specialized model, because you just have a lot of interference. I mean, it sounds nice to have a pretty big language model, but it can be a distraction. And so it is astonishing how much data you're getting. And so I'm just
You're absolutely right. I'm not disputing you being right or not. I think what you're running up against is effectively our business constraints. So we're selecting right now to optimize for depth of reasoning and quality of resolution that we can achieve.
Fantastic.
And we're doing what we can with a limited resource. So the latency problem is something that we have no other option to bring latency down other than a distillation task. On the others, because we have a budget on compute that we can use and brute force, essentially, we'll brute force it now. But we're going to hit the limits of what this can be from our perspective fairly quickly, and for a number of reasons, not just because ultimately it's going to come down to the kind of performance that we want to have. We want it to feel really magical, instant, all of those qualities. Getting there is going to be through that path. I completely agree with you.
All right. I'm going to jump in here since we're down to our last 3 minutes. So Neve, first minute for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one point just on the earlier conversation when you were talking about the judge part of things, I felt that quite meta because The models themselves and inference are now doing speculative decoding, where you have the oracle and the draft. The model generation now, you have the synthetic data and it generating the smaller models, and you're doing the same internally. So it was just kind of this fun meta recursive loop. I think one thing which it's almost a question, but it may be a topic for another day that I'm thinking about is it's almost like the legal framework will soon become the product manager. And what I'm saying here is, where does the liability stop in terms of SLO and SLAs around your customers? So when the model goes AWOL, when occasionally it will, despite all the training and guardrails, the customer, it's their reputation on the line, they'll pass it on to you as a paying. But then do you pass it through to the model? Because that was something which kind of came to mind. I don't know if you want to try and answer it in 30 seconds.
No answers here.
Okay.
Thanks, Neve. Rich?
Cool. We didn't get to talk about rewards. I think you'd want rewards for things like the sentiment and the customer satisfaction. If you can measure the sentiment, that can be rewarding and can train the individual conversation. And also things like expenses, like if he agrees to give a refund for everything, that'll cost a lot of money to the company. They don't really want that. If you manage to save money, talk the customer into keeping his product or whatever. I think there's a lot of room for using reinforcement learning and tuning of the conversation based upon the individual traces and measures of reward.
And Rich, I mean, it seems to me like that's a very non-trivial problem. In other words, some of that will be the reward systems would be reasonably consistent across different customers, and some would be very specific. And you could imagine that onboarding a customer could then become quite a significant job of designing their reward system, because that will reflect the sort of the personalities and policies and of the customer. When you think, Rich, of reward design, probably almost nobody's thought more about reward design than you. What do you imagine would be the sort of focal challenge of reward design in a setting like customer service?
Well, things are easy. Like if the customer says thank you, I had to, or if the customer is angry at the end of the call, that can lead to direct rewards, and then just the economic impact, the cost to the customer, and ultimately you'll want to transition from customer service into even selling the next product. Oh, you enjoyed that. Maybe you'd like this other product, and you'll have sales, and there'll be benefits to the company. That can be part of the reward.
So you could imagine a reward system that is largely predicated on customer sentiment and economics. Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Sendhil.
First of all, I love what you guys are doing. I just love the idea of HR for AI. It's fantastic. I mean, I once wrote an article that's titled "Algorithms Need Managers Too." So I think I'm owed some sort of royalty, Mike. We can deal with this offline. So the thing I'll say is just something in the spirit of trying to be a little forward-looking that I think extends past what you guys are doing and just starts to think a little bit about this space more broadly. And what I'll say is, I feel like we've now learned, it's not the bitter lesson, Rich, but it's the awful lesson, I guess I'll call it. I think the awful lesson that we've learned in the last 15 years, again and again, and we learned it in social media first, but it's happening again, is that when algorithms go into social contexts of any kind, there's always a mismatch between the metrics we deploy and the actual things we care about. Everything is a proxy variable. Like everything is a proxy variable. People know that, and when they're acting in good faith, tend to create a buffer between the proxy variable and behavior. But recommender systems brutally optimize engagements, and because that's what they were asked out of. There's no buffer. There's nothing that can sit there. And so I'm saying this because I think as we start to see the same thing happening in customer service, you guys, I think, have a chance, but the whole sector has a chance to not repeat that awful lesson again. That is, we're going to have fantastic metrics, but whatever metrics we put, they'll only be partly correlated with the actual thing we care about. Because neither dollars, nor does customer satisfaction, there's always slippage. And when there's always slippage, so I guess I would just sort of say, as a piece of long-term looking strategy, I would have thought a really fantastic thing you guys can do is to constantly be asking, where are all the ways that the measures are far from what we care about, and to recognize there will always be ways, and that the solution isn't to create one more measure, but to ask safeguards that sit between, so kind of like the proxy problem. Anyway, I'll leave that with you guys, because I do feel like
Such a great point, Sendhil. That's such a great point.
Excellent. All right. Well, Mike Murchison, Mike Gozzo, really nice to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing about your company. Congratulations on all the success so far. And hopefully some ideas come out of this meeting that will ultimately be helpful in thinking about the next step.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
And that's our show for today. Thanks to Rich Sutton, Sendhil Mullainathan, and Niamh Gavin. And a special thanks to Mike Murchison and Mike Gozzo from Ada. Thanks everyone for listening.
The views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Intrepid Growth Partners. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as financial, investment, or legal advice.